nightmare.
This stuff they're doing is so evil. It's almost like if you had a video game and the point of the video game was to be as evil as possible to as many black people in Africa as possible. Like and then making it so that they're like trying to get us so they're drinking urine and feces. That's the most insane, evil thing, man.
Thank you to whoever made the Dyer wave audio. I like that. It's some sweet stuff. In fact, I may just let that play again while we let some more people roll on in here. is this? I don't know. It's me. It's Amid the Ruins. It's a guy who makes Dyer wave music. It's Amid the Ruins. Dyer wave music. What I've talked about in probably 100 articles at Jay's Analysis is the implementation of the AI smart grid and the giant smart cities, which is what IBM talks about publicly building. And that's where we're going, and that's what I think we have to be really concerned about. So all of these tensions, they are part of a long-term strategy to basically get everybody moved into mega cities. They'll be forced off of land and so forth for environmental reasons, and basically concocted and invented environmental nonsense. Then you'll be stuck in some hellhole mega city in a, basically a carton-size apartment living over a Target or something, or inside of a Target or a Walmart, as I said several years ago. It's actually coming true now. There's actually Target cities. This is all part of the long-term globalist strategy. So, but to get there, you've got to have the constant clash, the constant alchemical blending and mixing and smashing together right out of Manichaeanism to produce the convergence, to produce the synthesis. And that's what's crucial in all this, and what is absolutely true from an alchemical, esoteric, philosophical, and geopolitical perspective, the fact that the ruling elite seek to be post-human. jaysanalysis.com.
We can abbreviate that as the WN.
All right, welcome everybody. We're live. This is Jay's Analysis. This is open Q&A. We've not done an open forum Q&A in a good while, and we have a few of our esteemed colleagues with us today. We've got some of the mods from the Discord. We've got Father Deacon, and we've got the beautiful and lovely Tristana of Ecuador. So a packed house, a multicultural variety of diverse guests.
Diversity.
We are truly practicing diversity.
Diversity, exactly.
And
it is our greatest strength.
It is our greatest strength. And so one of our strongest diversity proponents is Tristana, and she is with us today. Welcome, Tristana.
Thank you. Finally somebody get me the proper gender. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm still waiting on my gender-affirming fight. The call is out there. Any vegan woman who wants to get in the ring and throw hands with a real woman, DM me. We'll set it up. Freely the Banana Girl, Jasmine Gaines, Michelle Lowe. We can do this. Charity boxing match, of course. I'm not talking about getting violent, right? I don't want to be violent with women, but, this is sport. It's for sport.
Well, you heard it first, right? You heard it here. Tristana has an open challenge to any of the vegan, I'm bigger than you, I'm stronger than you. All of the great vegan, the wonderful vegan people on YouTube. There's an open challenge. It's only to the women, right? Can the men take it up or not? Tristan, can the men take up that challenge or not?
No, I'm a woman now, so I'm not going to fight a man. That's great. That's sexist.
That would be.
I just want to fight women. I want to fight other women like, ooh, getting pumped, man. Like, just thinking about it, I get so pumped up. Oh, man, becoming a woman, I gotta say, it's really nice. And thank you for inviting me on.
Sure. Right. And I hope everybody enjoys the new soy face that I made there. This is probably the most demonic of the soy faces I've made yet. This has become a little bit of a legacy here to continue the tradition of the ever-evolving soy faces. This one, as we said, looks like it would be on the cover of an Aphex Twin album, or it's really the demon behind the soy is here. It's here. So hope you guys enjoy that beautiful picture, and let's get into it. So we're going to do open Q&A. I don't know what we're going to get. There is, if you want to join the Discord, the link is there in the show description, and primacy will be given, of course, to people who do the super chat. All right. But if you do want to be on air, as they say, you can come to the Discord and you can talk in this wonderful chat room with all these wonderful, diverse, multicultural people. And here is the Streamlabs if you would like to submit a Streamlabs question. But I thought we'd kick it off today with maybe just a brief introduction on a couple of topics that have come up recently with Father Deacon, which is fallacies. There's a few fallacies that get overlooked and forgotten, and a few kind of neat points that we've noticed about the fallacies. I'll give one point that I noticed, which is that, in a lot of the debates with atheists, the topic of the crackers in the pantry fallacy, which is the idea that all things are proven in the same way. Right? This came up in the Bonsenstein debate. It came up in my debate with Matt Dillahunty. And Matt, of course, eventually in the course of the discussion admitted that not all arguments are proven in the same way. And so he admitted it in principle, right, the argument that I was making. And that's the point here, right, is that you can't say, well, just show me physical evidence of a non-physical thing and I will believe. And so is there technically a fallacy called the crackers in the pantry fallacy? No, it's a name given for a non sequitur move in argumentation. And really, there's no high council of the logicians at Oxford, right, that lists the official fallacies. But if you
wait, hold on,
yeah.
Is that true?
Well, if you interact with the atheists, they actually commit a fallacy of authority by thinking that when they go to the atheist website and they don't see crackers of the pantry fallacy listed on the official, there's no official list of fallacies, guys. Did you know this? But it doesn't really matter because, again, fallacies are all just illustrating invalid moves in logic. And it doesn't matter what you name it, because if you were to deny, for example, whether there is a crackers in the pantry fallacy, you would essentially be saying that there's no such thing as a category error, because that's what that fallacy is. It's a fallacy of assuming that everything in one category is proven the exact same way that everything else in another category is proven, but it's not. And
by the way, that one's going in my book too. The infallible high council of fallacy.
Right. And the same for science. Science has an infallible Olympic council of the gods of science who determine what the consensus of science is. Didn't you know that too? So what's a couple other fallacies that you think are pretty common, Father Deacon, that you wanted to mention before we move to some of these questions?
So yeah, Jay, you're correct too. So people may say that, I've never heard that, or that's not, as if it was written in some book. Remember, all the informal fallacies versus a formal, which would be like a structural within an argument, something that doesn't follow because of the structure, an invalid structure of an argument or something like that. That the informals are just simply ways of saying that doesn't follow from that, in Latin non sequitur. And then you can name, well, in what way, well, what would you call that then? The way that didn't follow. Well, I'd call it an appeal to an authority. Now, why is that important? Because not every appeal to authority is a fallacy. You're just identifying when you do appeal to authority and make a conclusion and it doesn't follow, then you can identify it as an appeal to authority. Right. So people get that confused. So I think that's important. Let's see, what other... Well, obviously, question begging is the big one, right? That we always, and we joke, you and I joke about this.
just grant me all my assumptions so I can actually prove my argument without justifying, and then I'll beat you in the argument.
Right.
What's kind of a funny, there's different ways something can play out is like circular or question begging. That you've got to assume it in order to do the proof and prove it. So that comes up quite a bit. I'm trying to think what other...
Well, what I like to point out in the realm of when people try to do analysis of quote conspiracies or perceived correlations in philosophy in psychology, people will talk about correlations, not always causation, right? And there's the classic example that people have of the graph that shows like swimming pool deaths in Nicolas Cage movies, right? Like they go up about the same over the decade, and therefore, would we make a necessary correlation between the two? No. So that's a version of what you could call the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, right? Which is very common amongst conspiracy theorists, which is that similar patterns necessitate a common actor or a common plan or goal. And it may not. It may, but it also may not, right? And that's what we're doing in logic, is pointing out that there's not always a necessary relation, right? Something can be seemingly connected or similar or related, and it doesn't lead to a logical conclusion, right? And another example of this that comes up, for example, in Darwinian philosophy is the fact that some things look similar as zygotes, therefore they have a common heritage or origin, and that's just simply not the case. Ernst Haeckel's famous drawings are an example of a very famous fraudulent example of this, right? The zygotes of different species were falsified to make them look more similar, to promote the idea that there's a common ancestor that is the common descent for zygotes. And Ernst Haeckel is a famous forger and fraudster who promoted Darwinism all throughout Europe. So these are examples of like ways that you could apply these fallacies. It doesn't have to just apply to conspiracy. It's analyzing data.
Yeah, and
right?
you'll see this a lot in the quote-unquote current sciences going on, both in nutrition,
The
science,
coof
and then
the coof.
the coof science. The reason why is because of this, right? And they'll simply look at these kind of correlations, and that's the reason. Second here. What else could we say?
Gambler's fallacy is another one that we said a minute ago relates to espionage or geopolitics analysis, because gambler's fallacy, for example, sees a pattern in data and therefore postulates that the next event, right, is a direct result or will necessarily be consistent with the previous pattern because of the pattern. And that's also fallacious. For example, right, if I'm rolling the dice and the dice turns up the number 7 3 times in a row, the assumption of the gambler's fallacy is that, it's going to be the number 7 the next time. But there's no necessary connection between the fact that it was 7 3 times in a row, that the fourth time it will be 7, right? So if there's an event that has suspicious, shady connections or questions around it, it doesn't follow that the next event that occurs is necessarily also the same actors or the same motivations or the same, shady group. It could be, but the point is that it doesn't necessarily follow, and you'll notice that a lot of times in bad interpretation of events or analysis or so-called conspiracy world analysis. They make these mistakes.
I think we could put both of a lot of these fallacies could be subsumed under kind of more common general fallacies. Both of those possibly could be put under a post hoc ergo propter hoc, which is just Latin for after this, therefore because of this.
Yeah.
That's so if event A followed event B, then event A must have been caused by B. So that's somewhat similar to both those. Correlation doesn't equal causation. And then some of the gambler fallacies too.
Yeah.
Okay, what are some other ones?
Another one that Bonson pulled out that we covered in the Tabash debate, which is actually overlooked in a lot of you've actually pointed it out, right? When you talk about when somebody says, "Well, I just don't, find that convincing," right? This is what Bonson calls out as autobiographical details that are irrelevant to the argument. So what?
Yeah,
It doesn't matter what you personally find convincing, or it doesn't matter that Remember, Tabash was saying, "I find it very hard to buy that a God who gives me reason could then damn me for using that reason." Remember, right? So the fact that you find that hard to buy, again, it has nothing to do with the truth or falsity of the position, right?
That's why I always like to just kind of bring home by saying, when people say that I'm not convinced, and they don't follow that up for, because your argument's not a good argument, right? And here's why. When they don't do that and they simply just say, I'm not convinced by, I just drive the point home by saying, well, that sounds like a you problem and not an argument or
right.
my problem.
Exactly.
Like, perhaps you could go see a doctor about that.
What about loaded terms? That's one that comes up a lot. What do you think about loaded terms as a fallacy?
Like complex questions,
yeah,
stuff like
yeah,
that. Loaded
right.
terms. When you frame something in a way that, like a loaded question, you frame it, or a complex question is you.
Well, loaded term, you could think of something like reason, right? I mean, well, we all know what reason tells us to do in X, Y, Z situations. Well, I mean, reasoning is one of the most debated terms in history of philosophy, what reason is, how it works. So to do these kind of like appeals to loaded terms, or nature, right? Well, nature tells us X, Y, Z. These are loaded terms. It's not immediately clear.
I'd probably say not loaded term, but I'd probably put that in a species of like a fallacy of ambiguity.
Okay. What's a good example of a loaded term then? Because you will hear this come up, right? People say, well, you're using a loaded term here. Maybe abuse, right? Like, well, this is a form of abuse, right? Is that a loaded term? Like, it has a lot of emotional baggage around it, rhetorical baggage.
I think loaded is kind of like you're packing in like other stuff in there. Like, there's something kind of disingenuous about like loaded terms and loaded questions, right? But you're packing in additional meanings or ways to get the person to only think in one way about, or only be able to answer, or only address or deal with that term or question in a certain way. It's like you loaded the dice, right? To make the outcome favorable to you. That's kind of what I'm thinking about. What loaded means.
By the way, everybody in the chat, we've got a nice audience here, headed up towards 300. Welcome everybody on this nice Sunday evening. You can join the Discord in the link. You can also send your super chat, and I'll do one of these super chats here from, let's see, we got Tom Green for $4. Tom Bombadil. He says, how would you deal with verses that say, for example, by grace you're saved through faith? It is not your own doing, but it is the gift of God. It is not a result of works, so that no man may boast. But if it is by grace, it is no longer on the basis of works. Well, from the vantage point of how we come to be in union with God, all human beings stand in the same category of fallen, right? And nobody has a claim to, well, I'm due to the grace of God because X, Y, Z. And so everybody is, the grace that everyone gets is totally gratuitous. And we would even agree that the exercise of faith is also something that's gratuitous. It is also a gift of God. But that doesn't mean that the response isn't something that we do, Tom. So, for example, even amongst Protestant, even the most ardent defenders of sola fide, right, justification by faith alone, they still believe that the individual has to exercise faith. And guess what? Jesus defines the exercising of faith as a work. What is the work of God? It is to believe on him whom he has sent, Jesus says in John 5. So according to Jesus, faith is a work. So in other words, the point is that Paul can't mean in an exclusive sense absolutely no actions or works on the part of the person. But he's saying that even the good works that you do are still done in and through God's gracious synthesis, right, with our will. And that's why Paul consistently himself says in his epistles that he's a co-worker with God. Is Paul appealing to his own merit when he says he's a co-worker? No, of course not, right? Because he's recognizing that there is a genuine synthesis between his will and human energy and God's will and divine energy. So we don't posit that there's a fundamental exclusive idea that, well, if you ever do anything good, then that would be appealing to merits or works. Because everybody's in the same boat of, right, God doesn't owe us anything. We don't have any claim on grace. It's all gratuitous. So that's how I would say it. And so that's why
James... by the way,
yeah, go ahead.
That illustrates kind of just what we were talking about, too, that the fallacy of universal neutrality. That we all just read these grace, faith, works. All these terms just mean the same thing,
right?
Universally to everybody, and that the words are neutral, and therefore people's paradigms or beliefs or religions don't color the way that. So that's a typical fallacy that we see too, right?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
So you'll get this in what deal with this verse. We get this all the time with Protestants. Well, how do you explain? But we don't have entirely the same meaning of those terms. And you can't start from a bottom up. There's another one we could add to the informal fallacy. The bottom up fallacy. Just start from the evidence from bottom up and prove your system.
Yeah, if you just stack up the 1,500 pieces of data that prove that Jesus may have resurrected, all those 1,500 pieces of so-called data will tell you that Christianity might be true. That is a terrible argument, right? I mean, why would we even use that kind of an argument? And yet we have, many so-called apologists like, Inspiring Philosophy, Cameron over at Capturing Christianity, basing their entire channel on that kind of an approach. It's just a bad approach, and it starts on that false assumption of neutral ground. But yeah, exactly. I'm glad you mentioned that. By the way, Tom, Paul says in his letters to the Corinthians that the only faith that saves you is the faith that worketh by love. So if your faith is not working in charity, then it's dead faith. And so you see that's how Paul and James are harmonized, because Paul himself says that it's faith that works in love. That's the only one that can save you. So my assumption is that in all those texts, Paul is not saying that the exclusion there is all works, but specific types of works that, in most contexts, he's talking about the Pharisees who would appeal to the works of Mosaic ceremonies, right? And Paul is saying that Mosaic ceremonies can't give you the life and deifying power of grace because they're external ceremonies. Doesn't mean the ceremonies are bad, but that they were imposed for a time period until the reality came in Christ. And so he's in many cases saying that the law of Moses had a period where it was good, but then it's no longer useful or efficacious because the reality that the sacraments of the New Testament have come, you see. So,
you know what it reminds me of, Jay?
And by the way, how many times does the New Testament tell us that you have to be baptized? Are we going to set Paul in Galatians and Ephesians as if he's teaching that there's no baptismal regeneration, and he's contrasting? He's at variance with Peter saying repent and be baptized for the remission of sins in Acts 2. No, they're both teaching the same thing in harmony, and only Orthodox theology can harmonize that. Protestant theology has to pit the apostles themselves against one another.
So it reminds me of, you might notice this in philosophy and other areas, that when you have a position that's wrong, oftentimes the opponents reacting will reject it, but inherit and embrace the exact, in principle, problem that their opponents have. This occurs between debates, substance dualism, materialists, for example. However, I noticed that certain Protestants can fall victim to this too. So Christ is condemning the Pharisees in their pharisaical legalism, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And because they're holding to simply the letter of the law,
Mm-hmm.
while the Spirit gives life. Protestants realize that that's wrong, but guess what they do? In rejecting that, they hold in principle to the same problem. Like, they stay at the level of externalism. So it's like, oh, well, then law and ritual and tradition is bad. That's their takeaway from. And I was thinking this is somewhat similar when you stay on the kind of surface and just the letter of the law, that you miss the entire point. For example, like you can't simply judge something based on the law, nor would you, because somebody's just doing the law, nor would you say that because the law in itself is not a good in itself. Would you therefore say, well, you know what we ought to do, guys? We should just get rid of all law and society and order. That's the overreaction. Now, yes, a police officer who is obeying the law and doing all the things that he's supposed to be doing, you can't actually say that that's good, because what if he's doing it simply because he feels that he's forced to, that he doesn't want to get in trouble or something like that. So he doesn't beat people up. He doesn't extort people for money. He does the very bare minimum of fulfilling the law. Like, is that a good thing? Well, no, he's kind of being, pharisaical in that sense. There's no spirit of love, right? Now, you wouldn't say, oh, because he's doing that therefore we need to react and if we criticize that and say, yeah, that's not good, because he's not doing it for the right reason. It's not coming out of a virtuous character,
Right?
but a character of vice. Would it be correct, therefore, to say, well, we just got to get rid of law? That's what the problem is law. I feel that you have something analogous here as far as like the way Protestants work with like works and faith and grace.
Right. Yeah.
There's
False
a problem
dialectic.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, it's false dialectic, right?
Yes. And
So-
then you hear Protestants even say like, well, Jesus did away with all traditions, right? And it's all the ceremony and tradition, all this man-made stuff and works, and it's like, really, that was your takeaway from
Yeah. Right. So you have to look at the holistic context of what all of the New Testament and the Old Testament says about works, how they're done through grace, right? Again, just think of the text in Thessalonians, the text in Colossians, Philippians, where Paul says that it's the energy of God that worketh in him to do and to will for God's good purpose. As he also says that he's a cooperator with that energy of God in him, you see. So there's a perfect, again, synthesis there of the human will and energy and in Paul with the divine will and energy in Christ, in God. And that model is the same as our Christology, right? In Christ, in our Christology, the two wills, the two natures, the two energies, humanity and the divinity interpenetrate one another. There's a perfect, pure synthesis there. Doesn't mean that because there's a synthesis, they're equal. Obviously, the divine will is superior to the human will, right? Both in Christ and in us, because it's the divine will that created the human will, right? So it's obviously it can't be superior, but God can set up a world where creatures have the ability to cooperate and participate in Him. You see, that's
and
what,
Jay,
yeah.
by the way, that's another good one to bring up too, the false dichotomy, fallacy.
Oh yeah, this comes up all the time in religious disputes and
All the
debates, right? All of the heretics, by the way, in the councils typically are falling into some kind of either or, right? Well, either God is one or he's many.
Yes.
And so he can't be many because that would be
It's
tritheism,
either,
polytheism,
it's
so
either
he's
grace
one.
or it's works.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Also,
Well, you either follow the Bible, or man-made traditions.
Yep. Also, we could call this the lack of nuance fallacy.
Yeah.
I'm incapable of any nuance at any level. You're wrong.
By the way, if you want to ask us a question, you use the super chat link there, or the Streamlabs link for super chats. So if you just click on Streamlabs, it pulls up another page and allows you to type it in there, and you can do your super chat. But next question is Giancarlo Gutsastamas. How much is your book collection worth? What do you do when the police come to burn them? I don't know how much my book collection is worth. It's probably not worth that much because I don't have a whole lot of collector's books. It's just a lot of, paperbacks and that kind of stuff. There's a few sets,
Can you tell them the truth? It's all it's one of those things that you get at IKEA. It's like it's a facade.
It's a movie set, yeah.
It's a green screen.
It's a green screen.
No, it's a green. Okay.
I think the shaft set is worth probably $1,000. Last I looked on eBay, it was more than that.
Yeah, but of course mine's all written in and marked up, so it's not worth a lot.
Oh, well then it's devalued.
Unless I become
Also,
famous.
We had a few signed copies. We got a few copies of Esoteric Hollywood 1 and 2 signed by Jay Dyer. So I don't know how many $1,000 those are.
Oh, here's another fallacy. Your dusty books fallacy.
Well, the fallacy there is that because the books are dusty and I sneeze, I'm on cocaine. So that's what the haters all say, that I'm doing coke because the books make me sneeze. But Duke of Earl, $5.
But that is one that comes up. The antiquity fallacy, because it's old, it must be false.
Oh, this is a good one. Yeah, this is a really good one. Let's see. What's a common example of the antiquity fallacy?
I'm not gonna believe.
Oh, the dusty old books.
Superstitious, mythological.
The dusty old books.
Dusty old book.
Yes.
Well, then we might as well throw out Euclid's all geometry, Euclid's elements, Pythagoras.
Aristotle's logic.
Yeah, these dusty old mythological books.
Yeah, that's a great one. Duke of Earl, $5. Apaphatic reasoning leads to the conclusion that God does not have parts. Yes, I would agree with that. What is the fallacy that leads Roman Catholics to think that no parts means no distinctions? The presupposition that any distinction entails composition, division, or separation. That's the answer. So it is correct that Roman Catholics will believe in apophatic reasoning and then turn around and deny it because they try to do positive predication in terms of the analogia entis, the analogy of being, which doesn't work. Because if God is not part of any genera or species, he's not under any category of being, in that sense, created being, then there's no comparison between created being and uncreated being. But the entire argument is based on an analogy entis, an analogy of being between God and creatures. And the assumption is that the Thomists they'll say, but it's not identical, it's not univocal predication, it's analogical predication. But the problem is that everything that you look at in the way that they will describe what God is dissimilar to creatures. And if it's dissimilar, there's no bridge to have the analogia. That's the point. The argument is that everything that you're saying about what God is in his essence, even though you're saying it's a limited predication, it still doesn't work because there's no similarity between the being that is absolutely simple, immortal, eternal, unchanging, right? No distinctions that are real in him, and not composed, not composed of matter and form, perfect. Right? That's contrasted to creatures being imperfect, being composed of parts, being coming to be in time, changing, right? So if all the things on this side of the Hellenic dialectic are like a Platonic monad, and everything on this side of the Hellenic dialectic and the created order is the opposite of that, guess what? There's no bridge to have an analogia, because there's no similarity between the cause and the effect. And so at that point, the Thomist just says, well, we all know there's similarities between causes and effects. So it's like, that's a good job of question begging, but that's the very thing that we're asking.
Question begging, yeah. So, and the other thing too, what did we identify? And this is an important thing too, is the ad hoc rescue fallacy. Well, then I'll just posit this. I'll just come up with this to explain.
Yeah.
There's no reason to believe that other than I just made it up because then it'll make my story actually more coherent.
Yeah, scholastics loved the ad hoc neologism. Just make up a scholastic distinction on the spot to rescue the position. Here's how I would cash it out in terms of the recent debates going on in terms of divine simplicity. First point is the Roman Catholic, especially the Thomistic position. We're going to focus mainly on the Thomistic position, not the Scotus position, just for the sake of argument, because people like Tomaszewski or whatever his name is, they're arguing the Thomist position. Phaser's arguing the Thomist position. God is his essence in a strict identity is the first claim. The next claim that they make is that God is not his essence in strict identity because even the naming of him is apaphatic. So here's my argument in response to this. This is the root issue. They claim two different things here, and they claim both things, right? If you take the first claim, which is that God is his essence in strict identity, then you can follow this position out to logically saying that creation is eternal, right? Because the act of creating is strictly identical to the divine essence. And I'll show you the Thomist quote where he says this in a moment, or Thomas's quote. Secondly, you could take the argument at the second point that God is not his essence in strict identity, because even if we say actus purus, that's still not a definition of him. It's still in some way limited and analogical, right? So they'll say that means it's still, quote, apaphatic. But the problem with this is that this leads to atheism, because God, you can't say that there's as I said a minute ago, right, analogia entis, and then turn around and say, but it's apaphatic, right? Because everything that you're listing as a feature of God is dissimilar to the creatures. And so you don't have a basis to say that everyone knows that the cause is similar, has a similitude to its effect. And so if there's no similitude, which is what this position ends up saying, given its reductionism, then there's no basis for the analogia. So they want their cake and to eat it too.
And by the way, that is to simply throw in, it's being that's the bridge, right? To say that is, I would say, both an example of the ad hoc rescue and begging the question. So if you set it up that the creator, God, is nothing like, right, that creation, and therefore there's a gap, you can't then just go, but then it's bridged by me throwing in being.
Well, yeah, and being doesn't being.
God is nothing.
Being also doesn't work because being is derived from creatures, and then you're predicating creaturely being or, quote, existence in a generic sense to the supreme being, the supreme existence, and saying there's an analogia. It's again begging the question, because the being that God has, has none of the features of the being that creatures have. Right? God's being is uncaused.
It's not circumscribed.
It's uncertain. Yes, it's timeless. It's uncaused. It's, quote, perfect.
It's necessary, not contingent.
Right.
It's infinite. Right.
Yeah.
You end up creating a list of properties that are just the opposite of the properties of which you ascribe to being on the created side.
Right.
And I'm sorry, the generic word being isn't going to solve that.
Exactly. And God is not and God is not a member of any class, species, or genus.
Yes.
So how are you going to class being as a commonality between the completely different being that God has? This is why their analogia entis doesn't work. let's see. So uncaused, quote being, quote perfect, eternal, necessary, infinite. What's another property that they would say God has? Uncaused, being, perfect, eternal, necessary, infinite, simple, in their sense of absolutely identical in predicates, no composition, no real distinctions. So that's all the features. I'll put this up in a minute, and then we contrast this, and guess what? On this list here, all the properties of what creatures are the opposite. Okay, they're not similar, right? That's the problem, is that you can't be apaphatic at the same time as turning around and saying that God is, definitionally speaking, actus purus. It doesn't work, right? Let's see. Keep in mind, too, a big part of this argument, this is often overlooked, and this is applicable to the Scotist position as well as the Thomist position, is the presuppositions that they have about perfection, right? Which is that, well, we all know that the perfection that God has in his being, in essence, is higher than, or better, or more perfect than creatures. Well, now, wait a minute. Yes, that's true, but what do you mean by perfection? Well, we all know that simplicity is a higher level of perfection than multiplicity. I kid you not. That's one of the Thomist positions. Now, does that really match with Trinitarian theology? No. There's equal ultimacy between Father, Son, and Spirit, right? And the principle of unity in the Godhead. God is not more one than he is three. He's not more three than he is one. So there's an equal ultimacy in the principles. And yet, in this system's philosophy, they will say that anything that is not characterized by unity in this special higher sense is lesser and imperfect. They literally have that dialectical position, because if you read Bradshaw, he covers it in chapter 2, right? That there's just the assumption that eternality, timelessness, right, is higher on the scale of being. It's better, it's more perfect, and everything that's particular, that's manifold, that's multiple, that's created, that's in time, those are all lesser or bad. Okay? Roman Catholic philosophy adopts those exact same dialectics. So, Duke of Earl, you want the answer to your question? It's that right there. That anything that has real distinctions is a lesser status of reality. It's a lesser status of being. It's bad. It's created. It's somehow lower and beneath God because you can't, because of an assumption of what simplicity must mean. The whole position, the whole argument, the whole debate is all about what they say simplicity has to be. And they don't even get this, that what simplicity has to be from Scripture or from divine revelation. It's literally borrowed directly from Greek philosophers. It's that simple. Their definition of simplicity is directly what Plotinus says, word for word.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Thanks, Jai. That's really thorough. Thank you very much.
Right. Well, so let's look at this list here. I'm almost done. Let's see. Temporal. And I'm just going to illustrate. I did a whole talk, by the way, on this. It's some months back. I did a 2-hour-long critique for subscribers just of this point. If you want to find it in the archives on the problems of analogia entis. Eternal. Let's see. Perfect, eternal, temporal, necessary, contingent. So God is not contingent. Creatures are. One, and then many, right? That's another big one. Creatures are many, and God is one, and that makes creatures lesser or worse or lower in some ontological status. Now, we agree that creatures are lower in ontological status because they're creatures, not because they possess multiplicity. That's silly. Let's see. Contingent, finite. That is, they're extended in time and space. Remember, by the way, that in the Thomist position, simplicity excludes the possibility of the divine essence being in time and space. We're going to have an immediate problem for the doctrine of the incarnation, right? Because guess what? Jesus comes into time and space, and he does the miracles that he does within time and space. Finite, and then simple, and then versus composed. Okay, so here's the chart. Consider this chart to make it really simple. Here's the Thomist position on top about what God is. When you look at these features, he's uncaused, He's super being in the highest sense. He's perfect. He's eternal. He's necessary. He's infinite. He's simple, and he's one. This is contrasted to.
Finite and then
Hold on.
simple and then versus composed.
Can somebody mute, please? Thank you. So we contrast this with creatures. The being or the class of creatures is caused, all of them, contrasted to uncaused. It's a created being versus uncreated being. It's imperfect versus perfect. It's temporal versus eternal. It's necessary, it's contingent versus necessary. It's finite versus infinite. It's composed versus simple. And it's many versus one. Now here's the point. The Thomist wants to have a causal similarity between this, which is God, and this, which is creatures. But guess what? These are incommensurate. They're all the opposite. They're polar contraries of one another, you see. There's no similarity between these two. And when you ask them what the similarity is, they'll say, we all know there's similarity because every cause is similar to its effect. But that's the thing that's in question. I don't need to know that you think that. I already know you think that. I want to know on what basis, given this and this, you posit any relation or similarity between the two. Now, guess what? What does this start to sound like? Islam. This is very similar to the route that Islam takes. Very similar to the route that Jehovah's Witnesses take, Unitarians take. And then when we simply ask them the same types of questions, Muslims get lost. They can't make the bridge. Well, guess what? With no essence-energy distinction, there's no bridge. That's the point. The essence-energy distinction functions to do this bridge. That's how there's an analogia, you see. So when you collapse the predicates of God into his essence, there's no more analogia. It's that clear. It's that simple. Now you say, real quick, one last point, and then I'll shut up. You say, well, that's not what Aquinas says. Yes, he does. All right. Yes, he does.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah. So here's Aquinas in the Summa Contra Gentiles, being as clear as day, section 2, chapter 10. The manifold actions ascribed to God, such as intelligence, volition, the production of creatures, things, and the like, are not many different things, since each of these actions in God is his own very being, which is one and the same thing. There it is, clear as day. Can you read that? Everybody, there you go. Therefore, if that's the case, you can't have analogia entis. So that's how I would critique Thomism.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Nice one. Thank you, Father.
By the way, you'll notice, and I'm not trying to be rude to anybody on this stream, but I'm not talking about anybody on here, but the Thomists out there, generally speaking, that respond, they don't respond to that argument or that objection. Never. They'll always turn it into, they won't debate the predicating, right? They won't debate how we do or can't predicate about God at all. They'll turn it into a question about eternality and necessity and all that, which is fine. I know you can debate those topics, but
and they'll say, you have the same problem as essence energy.
No, we don't, because first of all, the essence energy distinction is not a doctrine that we came up with by sitting around and speculating. It's based in revelation. This is why Dr. Bradshaw, every time he argues it, where does he start? He starts in the Old Testament. It's not a philosophic position. It has philosophical implications. It's not derived at by philosophical presupposition. So we don't have the Hellenic assumption from Neoplatonism.
That's revealed in their questions. So when was this developed?
Moses, right? What does Bradshaw go to? Moses.
When was this developed? Before the foundations of the universe.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm sorry, Father Deacon. Is there any other comments you wanted to make on essence energy distinction or the Roman Catholic doctrine of simplicity?
Well, I'd say also. I mean, there's just a whole host of presuppositions that we could call out. So
Right.
That of both epistemologically typically in the kind of Greek metaphysics, that one has priority and perfection over all things. That we could also call out the peripatetic axiom. There's nothing in the mind that was not first in the senses. That all knowledge has to be known through kind of effect to cause. These sorts of things that we don't have to buy that.
Yeah.
And if you ask them to justify that, they'll appeal to the same system of how they know that. Oh, we know it because through the senses and through effect to cause, which ends up being viciously circular. So that's one way. Is you just call them out on the presuppositions that.
And they'll say it's not circular because everybody knows that. Literally, I'm not joking. When people ask Phaser in the book, they say, how do you justify the maxims and self-evident principles that you're referring to? He says, well, they're commonly accepted. Okay, you're going to use appeal to consensus to prove your self-evident maxim? I mean,
and by the way, when I'm going through, 19th, 20th century political thought, teaching this at the university, you read through, like whether it's Rousseau, Mill, Locke, Hobbes, Machiavelli. Guess what they all do? It's hilarious. They all do the same argument.
Right.
Well, it's everybody knows it's self-evident. Yet they're all arguing against. All their self-evident principles are all contradicting each other.
Yeah, it's funny how what's supposed to be self-evident and commonly accepted are the things that are the most debated, right? I mean, we all know what reason is, really. We all know what logic is.
So it's a cop-out because think about this. What is self-evident? It means I don't have to provide an argument or justification for it. Why? Because it's the starting point. It's self-evident. I don't need to. So it ends up being quite a convenient device, right? We could just pull that out anytime you get stuck. Just throw out the self-evident. Well, I don't need to provide justification.
And
that's self-evident.
Doesn't every Christian, by the way, in his metaphysic, if he's a consistent Christian, doesn't he think that the existence of God and who God is undergirds and makes sense of something like reason or the maxims or the self-evident principles like causation or teleology? So if Christianity as a paradigm, right, if God is the ground of those things, metaphysically speaking, then how can those things be self-evident or more certain than God? Because literally the Thomists will say that God's existence is not certain, right? Because that's in the realm of faith, and faith has an element of uncertitude and doubt. I'm not kidding. That's their position. And they'll say that there's more certitude about the things that come from investigation via the sense data and the sciences. I'm not joking, by the way. People think that I'm making that up. No. Go ask any Thomist. They will tell you that truths arrived at via sense data, right? Truths of epistemology, truths of mathematics.
Are better known.
They're better known and are more certain than God's existence. Imagine that. It's absurd.
From a Christian perspective, it reminds me of some verses of wisdom. Proverbs actually. Proverbs 3, starting at 5-7, it says, "Trust the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your path. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil." I think that pretty much answers the question. Don't you think?
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, not syllogisms from Aristotle. But I wanted to point out, if you have the Bradshaw book, I went to go get it off of the shelf. If you have the Bradshaw book, I'll leave this scary soy face up here because it's empty. It's just too good of a soy face to not have on screen. Let's see. I cataloged this the last time I read through this. Here it is. It's so if you read through page 27, if you have Bradshaw's book, 26, 27 is where he gets into this, and he makes this point about how in this system, and the same is going to be true for Roman Catholicism and their dialectics when it comes to Thomism and Aristotle. remember that Thomas is not just Aristotle and he's not just Plotinian. It's a synthesis that's wrong on both accounts. So he will take incorrect things from Aristotle as well as incorrect things from Plotinus. So the simplicity doctrine in Roman Catholicism is Neoplatonic, right? It's literally word for word the way that Plotinus talks about what a simple monad entity being is. And then the way that God relates to creatures, according to Aquinas, is Aristotelian. So what does he say there from Bradshaw? Pure actuality, which is what God is, it leads to the good side, right? In the Hellenic dialectic, good is being, good is unity, good is rest. Bad, the bad side, is non-being, multiplicity, and motion. Right? So this is from Aristotle. Now, does it make sense if you're a Christian to think that something being multiple, being many, something being in time or time itself or undergoing change, is that somehow inherently bad or evil or lesser? No. Right. There's nothing inherently bad about something being multiple or undergoing change or time itself. Didn't God create time? Yes. Didn't God say it is good? Yes. So these things aren't bad, right? Change isn't bad. That's why in the Eschaton, the Eastern Church Fathers, they explicitly say, especially Maximus, especially St. Gregory of Nyssa, that man will transcend the dialectical status of the created order such that the eternal state will be ever-moving rest. That's directly from St. Maximus. Why would he say ever-moving rest? It's because it's not Origenism. It's going beyond, right, the idea that eternal stasis is better than change. That's not true. That's Origen's idea, right? And that's the beatific vision doctrine, that really the only way to be saved is for the intellect to be unmoved and perceiving the divine essence for all eternity. Because if you're moved, movement and change is bad. It's a feature of time. It's a feature of created reality. It's a feature of the fall. No, it's not. Multiple options, multiple choice, freely willing is not a result of the fall. Adam and Eve had free will. They could will multiple goods, right? There will be multiple goods to will in the eschaton. So there's not just one thing to will in the eschaton, right? That would mean there's no free will in the eschaton, right? So anyway, those are just different routes that you can go in critiquing this position, and it spills all the way into eschatology. And I'm not making that up. There's a whole section in Maximus refuting the eschatological conclusions of Origen. Origenism is not just about apokatastasis. It's about the one and the many. It's about maintaining the will in the eschaton, which is a fundamental aspect of human nature, right? We can't lose our will in the eschaton. We wouldn't be human anymore. Well, how are we still possessing free will in the eschaton if there's no evil? Precisely because there's multiple goods to will. You see. And this is in the Ambigua. There are two books, the Ambigua, written to refute Origenism and his eschatology by St. Maximus. So anyway, I'm moving on. We need to move on here because I'm rambling. Anybody else have anything else they want to say about that? I can't see the screen.
No, I'm just tired of you rambling.
Yeah, I know you are. I know you are. I'm going to shut up. Let you ramble a little bit.
That was great. Thank you.
Sure. Tom Green, 150. Bro, didn't you know that fallacies are just debate tactics? Yes, that is what the neo-pagans say. They literally think that a fallacy is something that people just made up to like one-up and trick people. I'm not kidding. But that is just patently absurd. Andre Vazalai. By the way, Father Deacon, how would you reply to like a pagan guy that said that well, fallacies are just like things that you made up to like one-up people?
Yeah, that's strange.
Can somebody stop clicking? There's somebody's needs to mute. Like they're.
Prove it. Prove. I mean, so again, it's not the names that we're concerned about. You want to change the names. So I just boil it down and ask the question. So what you're saying is that you think everything follows logically?
That's a good way to put it.
Actually make
Yeah.
non sequiturs. Like, I'm trying to get out what you're saying. Yes, I'm making up the name. So it's sort of like this. People get the same confusion.
No. This guy's going even further and saying all logic is a game to trap people. You just made it up. It's more absurd than that.
Oh, I see.
It's even more absurd.
Yeah, well, that just becomes self-refuting, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's using logic to say all logic is made up, right? That's a universal truth claim.
Yeah, and while at the same time, but this one isn't. He's pretending that it's not made up and giving it the status of not being made up.
Right.
While he appeals to and says that it's all made up.
Mm-hmm. Andre Vazalachi, $3. What do you think, Father Deacon? I'll ask you this. I'm going to take a little boy's bathroom potty break. What do you think?
When you come back, then I'll take mine.
Okay. What do you think about agnosticism? Is it a transitory phase, or is it something that you can legitimately, I'm going to reword this, refuse to choose? How would you differentiate an agnostic position from a straight up atheist position, and how would you debate an agnostic, right? Do they have an out by saying, well, I'm just going to choose not to choose anything, and you can't debate me?
Yeah, I guess there's different types of agnostics, right? There's those that are maybe perhaps more humble, that will say, I don't know.
How are you?
Then there will be those that they think that they're being sophistical and thinking they have an out by, I'm not making a position. I'm choosing not to choose. And therefore, I don't have to justify anything that I'm saying. I've encountered, obviously, both, and the latter is the one that I'd like to address right now. That, okay, you may be suspending judgment or for taking position X, but so you just bring it up a meta level. Okay, but in order to actually make that statement about that, you're not beliefless. You're not, and even if you try to take that position, I just don't commit to any beliefs whatsoever. You're making a belief about not committing to any beliefs. So I just push the question back to, okay, let's not focus on whether you're ascribing to a belief X or that you're agnostic about X. Let me analyze all your other beliefs and whether you're justified in actually doing that. Because it's on those beliefs that they think they're actually going to be justified in actually taking an agnostic position or not choosing or suspending belief or something like that. So I just roll it back. I'm like, you don't get out of you just push the problem back and we'll just address those issues. They don't escape.
Right. Yeah, good point.
And get out. Yeah, that's typically what I would do.
Tom Green, 232. Thank you for that answer about works and faith. That was more detailed than I would have that I could ever imagine. I don't know about that. Come on now, you can imagine how detailed it could be. This will help me a lot when I talk to Protestants who don't like orthodoxy. Good, yeah. And by the way, there's a lot of different texts actually in the New Testament that speak to this point. For example, if you look at Luke, I think it's Luke 1. It says about is it Zechariah and Elizabeth, that they were both righteous before the Lord, having kept all the law or something like that. I forget the exact phrase, but right, very difficult for a Protestant to make some, like, you're not supposed to be able to say that, yet it says that about Zechariah and Elizabeth, right? Also, many of David's Psalms, David appeals to the fact that he kept God's law, right? Now, David didn't believe that he was like he wasn't a Pelagian. He didn't perfectly believe that he had never sinned. Obviously, he knew he sinned, right? There's multiple penitential Psalms, right? Psalm 6, Psalm 51, etc. Psalm 5 or 6, I forget. But if you just look up the penitential, so he knew he sinned, and yet in the other places he can appeal to God and say, I have kept your law. I've not wickedly departed. Now, we know, yes, it's the Spirit of Christ ultimately, right, that's truly praying through David in the Psalms. But sometimes it's David. There is also the historical, literal sense of David saying in the Psalms that I have kept your law. I've not wickedly departed from you. Vindicate me against my enemies, etc. It's both David and Christ praying those prayers. Now, obviously, Christ isn't praying the confession of sin prayers, right? Jesus isn't. He's inspired it, but he's not praying as if he's the one who had sinned in Psalm 51. But
and
anyway.
by the way, this was brought up. I was talking with a Lutheran pastor up here that there's different notions of sin too. We tend to think that here's another fallacy: the fallacy of univocalism, that words only have one meaning.
Yeah.
And so sin means missing the mark, but aren't there different ways you can miss the mark? In action, word, deed, thought, or the very fact that, so in one sense before, like let's say infants actually haven't committed any actions yet, sinful actions. But we could say they're missing the mark in the sense of they've inherited death and a tendency towards corruption. They're missing the mark, they need a savior. So I think you need to be nuanced about. So there are saints we could say that they kept the law. They did not in action commit any sins, but they needed a savior.
Mm-hmm.
They're in sin or something like that.
Yeah, Paul does this.
They've fallen short of the glory of God because they didn't have the principle of life. They're dying, right? They need to.
We covered this. I forget what a few streams back with somebody when we were talking about or maybe it was on Discord, the Roman Catholic idea of mortification. If you look at their justification for why they believe in mortification, it's because they take the text where Paul talks about the flesh to mean his literal physical body. No, Paul can use the word flesh to describe the fallen state of humanity as a whole. It's not the literal physical body that has to be whipped and flagellated or something like that to bring your body into subjection, right? That's not what Paul's talking about. But they'll misread Romans 5 and 6 to mean that. And if you read Romans 5 and 6, you could see how Gnostics would have that attitude, right? I mean, you could literally read that passage in a Gnostic way if you talk about when Paul talks about the flesh fighting the spirit. If that means the physical body, I mean, then Paul's a Gnostic, right? But he's not, right? Because he's using a word like flesh to signify the state of human beings and the passions after the fall, not the physical body, right? And so you've got this long history of absurd, self-mutilation that develops as a result of thinking that mortification means punishing your physical body. That's absurd. And guess what? Origen found out the hard way that when you chop off your balls, it doesn't actually solve the problem of lust. Right? Itchy Cornhole, $10. He says nothing. Well, if he had spoken, it would have been a different type of sound, wouldn't he? Bogdan, $5. Have you ever had a demonic experience? What is your favorite saint? I think everybody in the Orthodox world has had what you could call demonic experiences in the sense of temptations, demonic dreams. I have dreams about demons pretty often. Demons attacking people, being in people, this kind of stuff. I've been around a couple people that I think were at least demonically oppressed, if not full-on possessed, as in different voices coming out of them and doing attacking people and not remembering it. So I would count those as demonic experiences. My first LSD trip was a bad trip where I interacted with an angel of light that I think was a demon. So I would count all of those as demonic experiences in the strict sense. Father Deacon, do you or anybody else have a comment on demonic experiences?
Yeah, I'd definitely say, there's different levels of it too. obviously temptations,
Yeah.
and then dreams, and then kind of I've had several encounters, something that's further than that, manifestations, both when I was younger, and other experiences that were beyond just the realm of like dreams and temptations, like actual manifestations of like demonic evil entities. Now, like, so do you see it goes from obviously the most common, we're all being tempted and being attacked, to dreams are fairly common. As you kind of move up, obviously that gets less common.
Right. Well, you just had a demonic.
It's not so uncommon that, like, we Orthodox, when we heard that, would be like, wow, like that. I've never heard of that before.
Well, here's you all had a demonic experience right here by being faced with the soy demon. So here's the soy demon right here.
Oh, also, every time I have to deal with absolute divine simplicity,
demons manifest. So let's see. Bogdan says also, who is your favorite saint? I don't know if I'd have a favorite, but my name day is the prophet Daniel. And obviously Father Ananias would be Ananias. So
people always ask me, you mean Ananias is fire? I'm like, yeah, because they were actually named saints.
Christian Daniel, $20. Keep up the good work, Jay. Orthodoxy needs smart guys like you guys represent. So yes, definitely, Father Deacon Dr. Ananias is a smart man, and we are thankful for his gifts. Code Santos, $5. St. Athanasius says in Contra Gentes that something is good inasmuch as it fits the pattern of God. Can things be partially of the pattern of God or partially good? Yes. Right. So creatures do participate in being, in goodness, and some of the attributes of God. And that's why, if you read St. Maximus, right, this is why we talk about mode. Not every created thing participates in God in the same mode. So, for example, theosis, which is specific to the saints, is not the same type of, quote, participation that just created being has, right? Rocks, sticks, stones. So we would say yes, and there is a mystery involved in this, right, is in the sense of how can there be a participation in different ways if God has no parts? That's because God transcends the logical antinomies. And this actually comes up in Dionysius. It comes up in St. Gregory Palamas. And it's a response that's applied to many areas where there appears to be a logical antinomy or an either or, right? For example, well, if the law of identity is true, how can God be one and three, right? How can God be Father, Son, and Spirit? And how can the divine nature be fully present in Father, Son, and Spirit without there being parts and division? And that's because the Trinity is a unique thing that transcends the logical antinomies. This is fundamental to Cappadocian, Trinitarian, any Christian Trinitarian.
God is contradictory, or
right.
He can turn into not God and stuff like that.
Right, exactly.
And one way to put it is that does God have to come down to and reduce in every way to your logical categories of created language?
It's the other way around, right? We can say
or
that.
Right. Yeah, we can talk about God in terms of these categories and this continuity, such that he doesn't contradict himself, but he exists beyond those categories.
Exactly, and the laws of the created order, we would say, do reflect him, not in totality, but in a limited way. And it's those laws that are grounded in God. It's not the other way around, that the laws are eternal truths that we then judge and categorize God by. So we have the exact opposite system of what you tend to see, right, in the tendencies in the Roman Catholic world, to where they will say things like God literally has to submit to the law of identity, right? there was a Roman Catholic guy who was saying this stuff not too long ago, right? The Trinity is not like creatures. Okay, I mean, there's similarities, right? Creatures have unitive and multiplicity, unitary and multiplicity in terms of features, right? And then in a sense, that's similar to the way God is one in many. But the way God is one in many is not like the way creatures are one in many, right? So there's similarity and there's dissimilarity. There is analogia, but as we said, you can't have the essence synergy. You can't have analogia without the essence synergy distinction. All right, that's fundamental to orthodoxy. And when the Cappadocians explain analogia, here's the irony, right? They don't collapse all predicates into the essence, right? They say that the energies are what come down to us. We don't know God's essence. So to have analogia, which all the Cappadocians say, especially Gregory of Nyssa, when he refutes Eunomius, he makes arguments on the basis of analogia all the time. But the analogia are to the energies, not the essence. So, I mean, just go read against Eunomius by Nyssa or against Eunomius by Basil. Basil says all the same stuff. In fact, Basil has the opposite exegesis of Exodus 3 that Roman Catholics have, or Thomists have, right? Exodus 3 is exegeted by Basil to not be a statement of the divine essence. Roman Catholics say that Exodus 3 is God saying, I'm supreme essence. So you go on to say, does morality have any gray areas, or is all morality black or white? There are
black and white, absolutely. No.
Right, so it's a case by case, right? In some situations, the moral situation is black and white, and in some cases, it requires judges and wisdom to make a judgment on the basis of the case. This is why the church has canon law, right? Because you got centuries of people having to make these kinds of decisions. So it's both and, not either or.
I'd also say that out of all the ethical theories, orthodoxy probably shares is closest to something like virtue ethics, and what we could appreciate about virtue ethics is when you get into kind of moral conundrums, people all want like a single algorithm. Okay, in this situation, what numbers do I punch in? Can I plug this situation in my quadratic formula and get the correct answer? With many things in life, especially practical things, there is no one formula, one size fits all. There's rules of thumb, but really, it's the right actions done in difficult situations because the person's acquired spiritual virtues,
right?
A state of character. So there really is no kind of, in fact, trying oftentimes to algorithmize everything, kind of one algorithm for a particular situation could lead to disaster.
No, this is like the moral calculus of the utilitarians. It's absurd, right? It's a futile project. Let's see. AD says for $10, after Cain killed his brother, he was worried about being killed by others. Who were the others, and where did the wife of Abel come from? This could not be a mistake. Right, I think that in the early stages of Genesis, you have the Moses as author focusing on the important figures in the lineal descent, right? So remember that the purpose of Genesis is to describe redemptive history in terms of how we will have Jesus being of the lineage of Adam and Abraham, right? Because Jesus has, so they're picking out particular figures in the genealogical descent that matter. That doesn't mean that there's no other descendants or there was literally no other children that Adam and Eve had. In fact, I think the assumption by those texts is that they had many, many children, right? That's the point there. And if you look at the fact that the lifespan was a lot longer as you get back towards Genesis, there was a lot more time that they had to, be having offspring. So that's what I would say to that question, is that it's not saying that there was literally no other descendants except, Cain and Abel. Aaron Burrows for $10 says, I grew up as an off and on Jehovah's Witness. They have some positives. Well, wouldn't say that, but I mean, depends on what you mean by positives, I guess. What are your thoughts on the Jehovah's Witnesses, and what arguments would you have that I could ponder on? My brother is still a member and is depressed, and I don't know how to help him. So first thing I would say is that you need to not utilize their false translation, right? So they use a faulty translation that, for example, in John 1, changes the doctrine of the eternal generation of the Son to make Jesus a God. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was a God. And this is, not hard to actually figure out. You can go read the church fathers of the first, second, third century to see that they all teach the deity of Christ. Now, I say that because that disproves the Jehovah's Witness Watchtower claim that Christianity corrupted itself with this doctrine of the deity of Christ after Constantine. So you can easily show, right, that in the first 3 centuries, the church universally teaches the deity of Christ in those church fathers. You can read Clement, you can read Ignatius, you can read Ananias, you can read Justin Martyr, you can read Cyprian. You can read all these people prior to Nicaea that teach the deity of Christ very clearly. Secondly, they didn't do very good in their editing, because you can read each of the chapters of John, right after John 1. There's John 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Go watch my Gospel of John talks, and I illustrate where in each chapter there's actually a reference to the Trinity and the deity of Christ consistently. Now, I'm not saying that it's only proven in the Gospel of John. I'm just looking at the Gospel of John in those recent Gospel of John talks. And one thing that we've noticed is that each chapter elucidates both the deity of Christ and or the Trinity, literally in each chapter of John, all the way up to John 10. And then, of course, it's not. I don't anticipate being any different as we investigate the rest of the chapters of John either. But beyond that, I have a 3-hour talk I did on the Trinity and the Incarnation in the entirety of the Bible. So those are good places to start in terms of how I would go against refuting any Unitarian or anti-Trinitarian group. And so really the argumentation, the apologetic for a Jehovah's Witness is going to be the same as for a Muslim, right, or for any Unitarian group. And so go check out those talks if you want to look at that. And also, there's other interesting historical facts. I mean, Charles Taze Russell himself was a lunatic, was into Egyptology. He was a Freemason. He obviously imports all of this absurd stuff into his system. It started out as an exotheology that Jehovah was from the Pleiades or something like this. And people who have chronicled the history of Jehovah's Witnesses as a cult have literally chronicled all of these absurdities and failed predictions. In fact, they've predicted the end of the world numerous times, and then they have to revise that prediction when it doesn't happen. I mean, it's just obviously a cult, right? I mean, I don't know how much simpler to make that. I mean, it's obviously a cult. Father Deacon, I don't know if anybody else has any overall comments on Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, that's a good. Again, it's important to bring it back to kind of the history. Their presupposition, right, is like you said, is their translation of the Bible. And whether you're dealing with Protestants, Roman Catholics, or Jehovah's Witness or any kind of sect, I think it's important to go and point those early first centuries are really important, especially the first century saints and writers. Some of them were eyewitnesses to Christ, and many of them were writing under the guidance of the apostles, some of the apostles themselves, and that, if they were writing things, they were incorrect. They were coming up with new doctrines that would have been called out, just like we see, throughout the whole history of the church. If the stuff's created, if something's new, it's called out, right? We have historical evidence of. And all of this is pre-canonization of Scripture and universal kind of reception of the the Gospels and epistles throughout Christendom. So that's why I think it's really important. You want to know what Christ and the apostles taught, like go to the first couple centuries.
Yep.
So you just call them out on their presuppositions.
Yep. I put 4 links there for you in the chat of 4 different talks. One is Dr. Bo Branson debating a Unitarian. One is my talk on the Trinity in all of Scripture. One is with Bob the Builder on the deity of Christ. And then the other one is on the first several chapters of the book of John teaching the deity of Christ and the Trinity. So work your way through those talks if you want fuller treatments. Cobenhan, $18. Can you explain why few Christians discuss Freemasonry and Luciferian doctrines in terms of democracy and globalism? Well, many of them are just ignorant of it, right? I mean, a lot of, quote, Christianity has just adopted the spirit of the age. And so they just assume that, right, like republicanism, democracy, human rights, like all these things are just self-evident. And somehow we all know that that's where we would begin our ethics, and then Christianity or the proper form of government, right, should all conform to those presuppositions about liberal democracy. And so people just aren't taught. They don't know to question that. They don't know to think beyond, right? I mean, modern education, for example, presents political theory like anything prior to the Enlightenment was barbarism, as if the post-Enlightenment political systems haven't been the most barbarous. So there's a combination of ignorance, of lack of education, of social engineering, of the education system being brainwashing. All of those things go into it, as well as a lot of churches are paid off. A lot of churches are compromised. A lot of churches have Pentagon influence. All of those things go into being a factor. You say, a brief history of the future made me depressed in terms of its accuracy. Thank you, Jacques Ellul. Well, don't lose heart. I mean, the elites and their atheistic Luciferian plans will fail, and we have Christ's promise on that. Duke of Earl, $5. Top up for such a thorough and comprehensive answer. Many thanks. Well, many thanks to you, Duke of Earl, long-time supporter, long-time super chatter, and we're glad to see you asking such sophisticated questions. Hopefully we can keep answering them in a sufficient way. The Nordic Chad, $40. We all appreciate your work, brother. Well, I appreciate those fat super chats to keep the stream going. Anybody want to help support us and our work, me, Father Deacon, and the other mods, feel free to keep doing the super chats. Maybe now we can move to the call-in. We'll call it a call-in. It's not really a call-in, but we'll call it call-in. If anybody wants to, in the Discord chat on voice, step into the fray, feel free. Come on.
Hello, is this Jay Dyer?
I mean, there's a whole room of 50, 60 people in here. I know y'all want to talk. Come on. You don't have to give your name. Nobody's going to dox you. Nobody's going to attack you.
What's up, Jay?
I'm about to jump out of here, guys. It's been a great stream.
Okay, thank you, Tristana. Hopefully, we can find somebody who won't dead name you and will fight you in a celebrity boxing match.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, we'll see what's up. We'll see what's up. That East Celeb boxing match. It's coming. It's coming. Any vegan women out there who want to step up, throw some hands, let's do it. But yeah, guys, it's been really nice. Just a little shout out to my channel, Prime Ledge Health. I'm gonna do a stream tomorrow night at 8 EST. Hope all you guys can show up. And thanks for this one, Jay. Really enjoyed listening.
Well, I'm sorry that we didn't talk about
trans boxing and stuff
yeah,
like that.
and the issues that really concern you, but yeah.
Yeah, guys. No, it's been you guys. All your work has been such a blessing, and always.
God bless you, man.
Yeah. Have a good night, everybody.
All right, thank you, Tristana. All right, we did have a quote caller. What's your issue, caller?
What's up, Jay?
What's up, dude?
Well, I'm not going to challenge you on anything.
I don't care. Do whatever you want, dude.
Oh, I actually just have a question about it. Not really even about like the theology, just about I I come across like a lot of these liberal Christians who will try to tell me that, we'll talk about, LGBT, and they'll keep trying to tell me that the Bible is mistranslated, that like that Greek word, I don't know how to say it, but it's that A word, doesn't actually mean what it means. What is your response to that? What do you think?
Oh, I think that's absurd. I mean, the moral teaching of the church for 2,000 years has been very clear about that. By the way, I don't think that's true, but even if it were true, it wouldn't matter because the way that we go about interpreting the Bible isn't on the basis of looking up what in one instance the word may or may not mean, right? We have a whole ethos of how we look at the morals, right, and the Ten Commandments and the whole of the faith from the whole life of the church, from all of her saints, from all of her liturgy, all of that. So, right, it's a weird Protestant move to be like, we go look at that Greek word in a Greek dictionary, and that tells us what the Bible means. That doesn't.
Yeah,
it
there's
doesn't.
another example of the bottom-up
Yeah.
fallacy that's typical to like textual criticism.
Yeah, I mean, think about James White, for example. Like, he's completely inconsistent in this because he claims to be a presuppositionalist. He claims to think that the texts are theory-laden. And then he turns around and says, if you want to know what the Bible says, you just go look up the Greek words in a Greek Greek lexicon or dictionary, and it tells you what it means. Right? So the Bible means what it says. But then he turns around and says that all texts and words are theory-laden. I mean, it's like, what? You can't be just appealing to the simple meaning of the text and then turn around and saying that there's nuance and, words are theory-laden. Anyone else?
I got a question about Florovsky. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah, I love his work. I'm a big fan of Florovsky.
Yeah, well, I'm currently reading The Living Body of Christ by Anthony Bloom, and he speaks about Florovsky, and I was Googling him, and I heard something about him being an ecumenist, but I'm not quite sure in what way and what your thoughts are about that.
Right, so I don't think Father Florovsky was immune to criticism. I don't think he was heterodox, but he probably had a more open attitude than others. But I don't think that detracts from his scholarly work or his overall theology. I mean, there's no Orthodox theologian that is perfect. And exactly what we mean by ecumenism, right, there's leeway for what does that mean, right? Does that mean getting together and having conversations with other people, dialogues? Does it mean that you're allowing for their grace to be had outside of the Orthodox communion? Or does it mean that literally every church is a path to God? And right, I mean, there's gradations of this, right? And so I don't think that Father Florovsky was. I've not seen anything heterodox in Father Florovsky, and I have his collected writings. So,
okay, so you'd recommend his books to me?
Yeah, we do I recommend them all the time to people. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing said about Meyendorff. Would you, for like somebody who's new to Orthodoxy, would you discourage Meyendorff or Florovsky because of their, I guess, open?
No, the official book of our server is Meyendorff's Byzantine theology. So no, I don't know why. I don't know why anyone. So it doesn't mean that Meyendorff never makes a mistake. I think Father Meyendorff was pro-theistic evolution. I don't affirm theistic evolution. I think that's a mistake, but I don't think that detracts from like the scholarship or the accuracy of what's in any of Meyendorff's books. Like his book on Gregory Palamas is great.
Yeah, I've just heard that criticism, and I was wondering if it's bad for like a catechumen. So
no, ironically, in Byzantine theology, all the stuff he says is anti-ecumenist. So
okay, that's good news. I actually did order that one because of your website. So
yeah, no, that's an excellent book. In fact, he argues consistently against Roman Catholic positions. He argues consistently against created grace. He argues consistently against Origenism. So, there's not really anything in Byzantine theology that's that could bolster an ecumenist position. Rabados, $10. Is Greek Orthodox the same as Eastern Orthodox? All right, so the Greek Orthodox is one, I guess you could say, jurisdiction or country or sphere within the wider Orthodox world, but they are not synonymous. There are Russian Orthodox, there are Serbian Orthodox, there are Romanian Orthodox, right? So there are American Orthodox, right? So the Greeks are just one people group that are Orthodox. Seraph, $3. Is it possible that Zeus and Jesus are the same? Absolutely not. I don't know if that's a troll comment or a serious comment. I mean,
it's pretty funny.
It is kind of funny. Why would we even think that Zeus and Jesus are the same? They don't even really share many commonalities. In fact, I can't even think of one commonality off the top of my head.
Did Zeus have long hair? Did he have a Nazarene vow?
Isn't zeus an old guy with a? I mean, maybe if you were going to try to make a comment out, wouldn't it be God the Father and Zeus? Wouldn't that be a better comparison than Jesus? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, one way, if you wanted to critique or contrast, right, Christianity or the Bible with paganism and the gods of paganism, read a little work like Ad Gentes or Against the Heathen by Athanasius, and he'll show you the commonalities of the pagan gods versus the God of the Bible. I mean, it's night and day. So, anybody want to speak up?
Oh, that's interesting.
What?
By the way, so when I was reading Rousseau thought that he kind of saw as Christianity. This is an interesting point here. He saw Christianity had diminished the political life. So it seems like for Rousseau, like his suum bonum is the polis and political life, and he almost kind of regrets Christianity coming in and looks back to paganism, because in the point he makes is that in paganism the gods served man.
Yeah.
And each nation had, so everything was, everybody's thoughts were not towards the gods, but the gods were for them, and everything was kind of nation oriented.
Yeah, paganism is atheism, basically.
There's a total difference where man now serves God.
Yeah.
And so he becomes less obsessed with anthrocentric and political considerations and more about the kingdom to come.
Right.
Which I thought was an interesting point.
That's
so just to
point.
remark that, just stark contrast between.
Right. Other unique aspects. I mean, Christianity posits a kind of, you could say, human dignity that's predicated on being made in the image of God.
Yeah.
Pagan religions do not have a notion of human dignity. There's usually a caste system of the elites that are higher and closer to the gods, and then the common filth people that are the garbage boys out there in the streets. Right? I mean, look at India and the throwaway people, or the extra people, to use the David Attenborough. The extra people, all of the extra people in the world. David Attenborough's term, right? That's paganism, right? I mean, we have the idea of objective morals, right? That it's not ever okay to commit incest, necrophilia, these kinds of things. Those are objective, and in a lot of paganism, right, the gods of the pagans are doing the worst types of things, right? They're like engaging in incest, they're engaging in bestiality. I mean, they're pretty disgusting, and this is a point that Athanasius brings up. You also get in Christianity unique doctrines like the creation ex nihilo, right? And so there's a distinction that's fundamental to our theology between the created order and God, right? And so we could never deify the created order to worship the created order, because right, there's a distinction between the created and the uncreated. All paganism has reality on a continuum, right? It's always a form of pantheism or animism in paganism.
You know what's funny? It's like the Socrates critique. The gods don't ever do anything godlike.
Yeah, exactly. So those are just some aspects of Christianity that are unique to it, that show that this is actually not just another kind of zeitgeist, ancient religious cult or something, right?
So Jay, I actually have a question.
Sure.
In regards to Genesis, so I've been recently reading the book of Genesis. I'm on Exodus now. Blessed Lent to everyone, by the way. In the book of Genesis, specifically when Abraham is going to sacrifice Isaac, is this perhaps the first time? Because when obviously he doesn't, because the angel of the Lord intercedes, that would be the word of God, and tells Abraham to not kill Isaac. Is this the first time, since Isaac gets back alive to Abraham, is this the first time we get the prophecy of the resurrection? Because this would be like foreshadowing. And also, is this a moral motif that we later see in Genesis as well? Because by being willing to kill Isaac for God, that would show that Abraham didn't fear death. He feared God more than death. And then you can see this in Jacob and Esau, because Esau lost his birthright because he feared death more than God. Is this a moral motif that continues throughout Genesis, and is this also the first time we see the resurrection?
So the first, it depends on how precise you want to be, because, for example, in Romans 4, Paul makes a really kind of deep theological argument that the miraculous birth that Sarah undergoes is actually a prophecy of resurrection. So kind of like you wouldn't think that when you read about the miraculous birth that has anything to do with the resurrection, but Paul in Romans 4 turns that to be an argument that the sons of God, those born of God, and their resurrection to come is pre-signified in the miraculous birth of Isaac. So maybe not technically, but it is implied, and in fact, right, Jesus, I think, implies this too when he makes arguments like that, where he says that to say Abraham still is, or before Abraham was, I am, or that Abraham, Isaac, and the prophets are not dead but live to God, are arguments for the resurrection. So you're right, you're on the right track. I just don't know if I would say it's the first one, and in fact, the very creation of Adam, right, and his fall, and the being given skins, the proto-evangelium, they're kind of predictions of resurrection. So maybe. And then what was your second question about the moral motif of what?
The moral motif of Abraham fearing God more than death, as he was willing to kill Isaac.
Personally, I think it's a roundabout argument against human sacrifice. I think that the purpose of that is to show that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is not like the God of the nations that did require human sacrifice. But yes, in fact, Moses is honored by having Moses' zeal for God is even above his family members. And Moses is honored for this. So is the righteousness of Phinehas. Phinehas is even willing to go against his family members because they've turned away from God. So there's instances, yes, in Scripture where Abraham, Moses, Phinehas are exalted because they love God even above family members. And in Abraham's case, even above the child of promise. So yes, I would say that you're correct in that. Elijah's in the Yeah, what's up?
I got a question. Forgive me if someone's asked this or brought it up. Have you guys ever debated Jeff Durbin from Apologia Radio, or have you ever heard of him?
We reached out to Jeff Durbin, I think, last year, and the response was that he doesn't even consider any debates for 6 months because he's so, quote, busy. I mean, that's probably true. I don't think he was intentionally trying to avoid me. But, I mean, I think we would probably have it's more likely that there would be a debate with him than somebody like James White. I don't even know if I want to ever interact with James White. I think he's a nasty individual. But I definitely think that Durbin is a potential. But he typically does the kind of thing that the Roman Catholics do where they're like, yes, we'll debate you in 6 months. Right? Yes, I'll debate you next year on a blue moon in Texas. Right? When the planets align at 1 a.m. I mean, this is they start piling up these qualifications, and it has to be done in Morse code, right? And we'll have a translator who will translate it into Hebrew. That's the
you
only.
have to type it all. Yeah, you have to type it all out. You can't.
In Hebrew.
I used to listen to him a lot before I became Orthodox, so I'm looking forward to that. That'll be awesome if that does ever come to fruition.
That probably won't, but okay. I mean, I'm not opposed to it. Yeah. I mean, the last thing that James White said was, I don't have time to study Orthodoxy. It's irrelevant to me. So he doesn't care. Somebody said James White is too busy fronting for REM. Does James White open for Michael Stipe and REM now? Do you imagine REM is going to play, right? and
That's me in the corner.
That's me in the corner. Right after James White opened for them to like trying to convince them all to become Calvinists or something. Does anybody have any more super chats or topics of discussion? It's open forum. Also, if you're in the Discord, you can come into the Discord, everybody, if you want. However, you do have to go through the vetting process. We do have a heavy-handed approach. You will get banned immediately if you're a troll. So don't expect to get very far, trolls. We have many mods, many excellent mods. So don't waste everybody's time. But you do have to go through the vetting. So, and your questions do have to be on voice. So, anybody else on the Discord?
Yeah.
What's up, dude?
I'm a Roman Catholic, but I want to sort of engage the Orthodox arguments for against the filioque, and then the ideas on the essence energies distinction. So I was wondering which books you recommend reading, and in what order as well. I'm pretty beginner on this stuff. I'm not very knowledgeable on it.
I would start with reading David Bradshaw's essay "Divine Glory," which you can find the PDF in our PDF bank, or you can just Google David Bradshaw, Divine Glory, and it'll come up under academia.edu. Next, I would read Essence Energy, What Kind of Distinction by Dr. Bradshaw.
Yeah, that's a good.
I would then move to letter 234 of Basil as an introduction. I would look at letter 38 of Basil, which, although not directly about the energies, is the presupposition of the essence energy distinction, which is the nature-person distinction. And even though that's not technically Basil's letter, it's called letter 38 of Basil. I think it's supposed to be St. Gregory of Nyssa, most people think. But regardless, the whole letter is about that distinction, and that will condition the essence energy distinction. Then, if you want to, you could try to move on to Dr. Bradshaw's book, Aristotle, East and West. However, if you don't have a lot of philosophy background, it's going to be a difficult book, especially in the first couple chapters where he gets really heavy into Aristotle. If you get past the first couple chapters, Aristotle, East and West will be a lot smoother in terms of the ideas.
If you beat the big boss, then you move to chapter 3.
So those are the easily the hands down the best places to start. If you do
Now, on the filioque, I guess what we would recommend Edward Szyczynski's book. I'd also probably recommend Pelican.
I would read St. Photius's Mystagogy before I read Szyczynski, because Szyczynski's going to give a historical overview, but to know the Orthodox position, the best place to start is Mystagogy of St. Photius. Yeah, and filioque is directly connected to the essence energy distinction, right? I mean the failure. So, those are.
Is there also are there any other like patristic sources as well?
Absolutely.
That you'd recommend?
I mean, the essence energy distinction is going to be fundamental to Cappadocian theology. I was just trying to give the introductory points, but if you want to progress in the Cappadocians, you're going to want to read next the 5 theological orations of St. Gregory Nazianzus. It comes in a little SVS book, all 5 of those.
Okay,
He teaches the essence energy distinction in there when he talks about the operations. Basil has a book against Eunomius where he will write about the energies and operations of the Spirit. You'll see that if you compare that to letter 234, it's the essence energy distinction. Basil has a work called On the Holy Spirit, which is important to read, where he talks about the essence energy distinction as well. You'll want to read now Against Eunomius by Gregory Nyssa is very difficult. It's very, very long, so I'm not going to tell you that you should read that. However, it does consistently and clearly teach the essence energy distinction. But you may not want to read a 700-page book that goes into that. But what's very evident from our perspective is that the Eunomian position is a strict, absolute divine simplicity position. And so the arguments that St. Gregory Nyssa makes are obviously relevant to this debate. If you want a clearer PhD work, there's the Rada Galwitz dissertation on simplicity in the Cappadocians, which I think is in the Discord. I'm not sure.
Sorry, what's the name?
Rada Galwitz, RADDE-GALLWITZ, and it's called the Saint Basil, the Cappadocians, and the transformation of divine simplicity.
Okay, thank you.
So now that's the Cappadocian period. Okay. Next, I would throw into that definitely the essay by Father Florovsky, St. Athanasius and the Doctrine of Creation, because that essay is showing that St. Athanasius is using the essence energy distinction argument against the Arians, and the Arian position is grounded in their simplicity doctrine, right? The whole reason they think that the Son is a creature is because of their presupposition of what divine simplicity means. How does St. Athanasius rebut that? Well, he does a lot of things, but one of the key things he does is posit a distinction between what's proper to God by nature and what God does by will and counsel, which is a distinction that he makes that's real. And if you don't believe in a real distinction, then you fall into the Arian dilemma. That's Florovsky's argument in that essay. And another thing he does in that essay is that he shows that St. Cyril follows Athanasius in clearly making essence energy distinction arguments. So it's in St. Cyril, in other words, and if you want to see that, you can see it referenced in that paper that you just Google Father Florovsky, Athanasius and the Doctrine of Creation. It's about a 30-page essay. Next, I would say you could read St. Maximus. I have an essay I did that has selections from Maximus on uncreated grace, and the fact that, for example, Maximus says that the grace that the saints participate in is the exact same energy that God has. So the energies that we participate in are the energies of God. You can read On the Divine Names by Dionysius. Dionysius teaches the essence energy distinction in many places in the Divine Names. You could read next St. Gregory or St. John Damascus in Book 1 and in Book 3 of On the Orthodox Faith. He makes the essence energy distinction fundamental to both his Trinitarian theology and his Christology. You can't his Christology makes no sense, right, if you don't believe in the essence energy distinction, because he applies all of the distinctions to the incarnate Christ. St. Maximus in the Dispute with Pyrrhus. It's a little book that's 80 to 100 pages. That whole book is premised on the essence energy distinction in Christology, and he refutes Pyrrhus by pointing out that Pyrrhus is collapsing essence and energy, and hence his monergism. So you can't have a diotheletism and a dio-energy position without the essence energy distinction, and that ends up being the teaching of the Sixth Council, the Confession of Saint Sophronius at the Sixth Council, which is a document. You can find that. It's a Henry Chadwick Oxford document. It also teaches the essence energy distinction. because that's a dogma of the Sixth Council. Maximus's theology of the essence-energy distinction is the affirmed dogmatic theological argumentation of the Sixth Council, and Roman Catholics just ignore this. They don't know that. They don't care. They say, "Oh, no, it's not. No, it's not."
And you say also that the Cappadocians were, their theology was dogmatized at which council?
Constantinople I.
Okay.
Also, the Saint Theodore the Studite, his book on the holy icons, it's all premised on the nature, person, will, energy distinction to argue for icons. So you'll notice that from the Cappadocians to Cyril to Maximus to John of Damascus and the Sixth Council, and then John of Damascus and Saint Theodore at the Seventh Council, the logic is consistent across the councils. It's all Christological, and it's all based on these distinctions. There's one more book I was trying to remember. I'm forgetting something. Anyway, those are the ones that mainly come to mind.
Okay, and then you'd recommend to start with the Bradshaw essay?
Right, because he says that the argument is from Scripture. Right. We don't believe in the essence-energy distinction because of philosophical speculations. We believe it because it's revealed to be so. That doesn't mean that we don't think there's philosophical arguments for it, but the basis, the starting point of why we think this is because of what's revealed to Moses, right? Moses goes up on the mountain. He experiences the goodness of God, not the other attributes or essence of God, right? God says, I will show you my goodness. If I showed you who I am in myself, you would die. And Paul says he saw Christ face to face on the mountain. So after that, by the way, there is the Palamite councils. And I would say, if you want to understand, what you'll notice when you read if you read the triads, if you read the 150 chapters of St. Gregory Palamas, and if you read the dialogue with the Barlaymite, and if you read Papadakis' book, Crisis in Byzantium, you'll notice that everything that Palamas is arguing is literally just consistent with what is in Photius, what is in the Seventh Council, the Sixth Council, what's in the Cappadocians.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I had a quick question in regards to tag.
Yeah.
How would you respond to an atheist who says that, or who would ask, why doesn't God need a precondition, like the laws of logic do?
Because the way that the system is structured and the way that the system defines the categories, God could not be grounded in other way. He's the ultimate reference point, right? So the attributes and the properties, if you want to say, the things that we're ascribing to God are themselves. They themselves exclude the possibility of referencing something else, because we're saying God is uncreated, God is omniscient, God is omnipotent. And so if all of those, God is sovereign, God is all powerful, right? If those things are the case for what we're predicating of God, how could there be another thing to appeal to, right? Because in
I think they really get hung up on the term God rather than the concept that the word's denoting. And we could simply say that, well, look, you're involved in infinite regress. I mean, eventually, if as far as providing justification, you're going to have to get to something in which there's nothing
right
behind it.
Yeah.
Is that the word concept fallacy?
No.
Oh, okay.
Different things.
So, yeah, they just get hung up on like, oh, you. I think they think about it like it's God of the gaps or just ad hoc. We're throwing.
Yeah, they think we're just throwing it in there. We're not. We're saying that no, this being is what is there could not be any other thing to appeal to.
Right, for those transcendental categories. Like once that's established, really you can't go any further.
It's just it's an infinite regress. Well, okay, what explains that? What explains that? What explains? And in that sense, I think Aristotle was correct that if that were the case, there would be no knowledge. So even he realized that, arguments, justifications have to ground out in something in which there is nothing further. In that sense, kind of apaphatic, right? There are no more words or concepts or things that you appeal to that then justify that. Now, we would critique Aristotle and that, well, his first principle ends up not doing what he thinks it does.
Right. So in other words, think of it like this too, that the principle of justification, or how we would justify things or going about justifying, is going to be conditioned by the system. So you can't take an argument or a thing outside of our system to try to subject it to, right? This is similar to the problem of, well, can God make a rock that he can't pick up? And if he can't, then he's not all powerful. Well, what all powerful means is going to be conditioned by the paradigm that I have. If I believe in God, if God is the grounding of my paradigm, then he's going to limit what it means to be all powerful, right? So obviously all powerful can't mean in any sense, right? That would be an autonomous definition of what all powerful is, right? And we're saying, no, he's all powerful in the sense that he's restricted by his own nature, right? So no, he can't make himself not exist, right? So that's an autonomous definition of what all powerful must be. And we're saying that that wouldn't work because what all powerful is going to be confined to and determined by what our system believes and says. So it's going to be what God says and reveals about himself that is all powerful, not what some random person thinks up and says, well, if he doesn't appear in front of me right now, then he's not all powerful.
Right. So he basically gets to set that limit.
That would be right. And that's coming from his paradigm saying that I'll only accept it as all powerful if it does X, Y, Z that I determine. And we're saying that I'm arguing for a system where God is the final reference point, right? Not you. So you can't subject my system to saying that you're the final reference point in meaning and predication, right? And then say if my system doesn't match up to what you say, it's faulty. But that's not an argument against my system, you see.
I see. All right. Thanks, guys.
It'd be like me saying to the atheist, make the black hole appear and make it, another being from another multiverse step through, or I don't believe in your system.
It's science.
I don't believe in science, so he would say to me, it doesn't work like that. And I'd be like, yeah, exactly. God doesn't work like that either. So
they basically poison the well from the outset of the debate, right?
Well, it's taking a extraneous to my system definition of what omnipotence must mean, and then subjecting my position to that. And if it can't and doesn't match up to that, then it's a defeater, supposedly. But if Christianity is true, in other words, it's begging the question, because if Christianity is true, if my position is true, then you can't use your definition of what all powerful must be, right? Because what all powerful means is going to be determined by God. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so basically God is like you just said, the starting point or final point. And he sets the definition of what's most powerful.
Right, so you have to think, because that's a question about the final reference point in the system, right? God. Right, we're saying that that's the case. We're not saying it's the case just simply because we say it's the case. We're saying that it's the case because that's what this whole system says about itself. Okay. So
that makes sense.
Yeah, you have to compare the two systems because that challenge is at the most fundamental level of our system for us, right? And so we have to say the atheist can't make that move because what we believe omnipotence is going to be conditioned by our worldview, you see.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Is this kind of a loaded term? This could be a good example of a loaded term, right? If God is all powerful, then he has to be able to make himself not exist, or he's not all powerful. Well, that's saying all.
Yeah, you're setting it up.
That's a loaded term there, because, right, what we conceive of as possible, or what the word omnipotent means, is conditioned by the presuppositions that we have. If I'm a Christian, then all powerful is limited by the theology that we have in divine revelation, right? And for example, God can't lie. So it's not possible for God to lie in Christian theology. Paul says God cannot lie, right? So all powerful is not in an exclusive sense, literally doing anything and everything.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because when we talk about power, the category of power, the ability to act, we're talking about the category of potential things that could exist. Privations and the lack of being, and logically impossible things don't fit in the category of either existing things or possibly existing things.
Yeah, that's a good way to state it. Yeah, it's like saying
you could say it'd be like that's a category.
It's like saying unless God does something logically impossible, I won't believe in God. But that's something
and
that.
If he could do it, I wouldn't believe him anyways.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's a thing that like no system could actually do. So this is a dubious sort of challenge. It's like if I were to say, give me an exhaustive explanation of everything in the world, or I won't believe your worldview. Well, nobody can do that, right? So that's like a bogus objection to a position, right? But actually, if you watch it, if you pay attention, atheists will do that a lot. They'll require things that no position could do, right? And they exempt themselves from that requirement too, right? And then they'll say, you Christians can't fulfill my, outlandish, impossible expectation, and therefore your system's false. Oh, really? Well, then every system is false, because no system can do the kinds of things that you're requiring.
Wouldn't an example of that be atheists asking for you to prove immaterial things in a material way?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's a category error, and yeah, exactly. It's an even more fundamental crackers in the pantry fallacy. That's what we kind of started off with, right? Like, I mean, it's kind of already setting from the outset what types of things you're going to allow to exist, and thus it excludes anything immaterial. Well, that's the very thing that's in question, is whether there are immaterial things. So you can't set it up to where I will believe in immaterial objects as soon as you give me material proof. It's like, dude, really? Are you that dumb? And as we saw in the Dillahunty debate, right? Matt himself admitted that he doesn't believe everything is proven in the same way. Well, there you go. So you admit the crackers in the pantry fallacy. Thank you. All right, we've been going for a couple hours. Does anybody have any other topics, issues, areas of discussion?
Can I make
Sure.
a comment?
Uh-huh.
So you said that I think you said atheists, they do this challenge where no worldview can, what was the word you used? Can fulfill what they want.
Right. They'll ask for a reply that's exhaustive or sufficient to the extent that it's almost impossible, right? Like literally no worldview could do the thing that they require, and their own worldview can't do it, but they exempt themselves from it.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm thinking about it, and don't they, that's kind of what they want, don't they? Because they, who is it that, I mean, actually, there's a lot of atheist philosophers that say that reality is the enemy. So it's almost like they don't even want any kind of worldview. Am I wrong when I say that?
No, I mean, well, I guess it would depend on the type of atheist, and like, if they're a more philosophically minded atheist, or just a more like real, if they're a more analytically minded atheist, they might not say that. But if they're a more, what's his name, the semiologist Umberto Eco, right? He says in his essay, reality is the enemy, truth is the enemy. So just kind of depends on the flavor of atheist that you're talking about, but yeah, does that make sense?
Oh, this is great. So I've got 2 more fallacies to write down. The unreasonable demands fallacy.
Yeah,
and then
that's a good way to put it.
I'm excluded. I'm specially excluded. No, I'm uniquely excluded from the critique I'm applying to you.
Mm-hmm.
Fallacy. How about that?
Now they will say that to the transcendental argument proponents. They'll try to flip that on us, and they'll say, but isn't this what you do all the time, proponent of transcendental arguments? You will say that your position is exempted from the critiques that you're making to my position. Yeah, but we're not just saying that. We are actually giving an argument as to why the position is not subject to the criticisms that you make, right?
Yes, we're not just positing.
Exactly.
They always think that it's
yeah, they always say that.
Just because I say so. And notice they'll say, well, I guess there's nothing else we can talk about because you just excluded. You just set it up. You set the game up, so I can't. It's like, that's not right. We're actually explaining why.
Right. Right. I mean, the transcendental argument is saying that in the worldview where you have God and all of these things that we believe in, it actually makes sense as to how there could be, logic, ethics, aesthetics, all these different things. That's the argument, right?
Now, we're not saying you can't apply the critique. You can apply the critique to us. It's just not gonna work.
It's not gonna work because we don't have presuppositions that from the outset exclude the possibility of knowledge. That's the point. You do, we don't. That's the argument, right? So to say, well, you guys are excluding yourselves from the critique. No, we're not. We're saying that our critique, our system is not subject to the problems of your system. That is the argument. You see, they don't understand that that's an argument. They think that you're just saying things. No, that's the argument. There seems to be a difficulty on the part of a lot of these people to distinguish a system from particulars or individual instances or empirical data. Like, they can't think of something being a system. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
There's a real difficulty and challenge for people thinking of things as a system and things cohering together, right? They think of it like a piecemeal, build it from the ground up. And the atheists typically think that, like, we, or even if they're not like a materialist atheist, even the perennialist types or the Thomists, they think we're just sitting around like speculating about like how to make up a system. Like we just sit around and be like, ooh, let's take this thing and then we'll make it this thing. Like, we're system building. This is what they always think we're up to. But we're actually saying that it's a thing that's revealed, right? We're not saying we're not system building, right? There is a system, but it's not a system that we like sat around and just came up with, right? It's revealed. It's handed down, right? That's very unique to the Christian paradigm, right? Remember that this is not mere theoria. This is not just sitting around and conceptualizing. The religion, the revelation that we're claiming to have is within time and space. It's an initiatory religion, you see. It's handed down. It's a body of tradition. It's not just the body of tradition. It's the true tradition, you see. So that's different than if I'm an atheist and I'm just me in a meaningless ocean of being of the universe that's just random chaos. Like, the onus that's on me as just some meaningless speck in an infinite universe to try to make meaning of things. It's just, that's a really tall order, dude. Like, good luck with that, right? You have to do the system building from the bottom up, and it's all futility. What's that?
Do you hear me?
Is this a troll? So we got.
No, I'm the Mexican. I'm the Mexican from the last time you did the voice chat.
Okay.
I
I'm not a troll. Trust me.
Okay.
The question is, I was watching Taylor Marshall videos, and he once said that garbage literature like Harry Potter is inherently demonic. Does this mean that most media is evil? Asking this because I grew up in a very laxant family, and I'm scared that I'm demonically possessed.
Well, I wouldn't recommend Harry Potter, but I don't think all fantasy is inherently evil. And in fact, not even the Vatican historically has seen all fantasy and, magical fiction to be inherently evil. It really depends on the case by case situation. And I mean, most Roman Catholics are big fans of Tolkien. I don't think Taylor Marshall would think that Tolkien is demonic. Maybe he would. I don't know. I don't follow Taylor Marshall, but I think there's a place for, C.S. Lewis has some really good Christian fiction that uses fantasy, right? Lion, Witch, Wardrobe, that whole series. I don't think those are inherently bad. It just depends on the way that the quote magic or this kind of stuff is used in the stories.
Oh, thanks for answering that. Another question is about the modern status of science. I have seen really weird stuff about the COVID vaccine. Some people tell me that it will kill you. Some people tell me that if you get it,
Well, I can't. So we can take that question to Discord, but I can't answer that question on here.
Okay.
But yeah, so we'll talk about that maybe on Discord or something. But
okay.
Tony Soprano, $3. He says, Jay, thank you for your work. What is the weirdest, creepiest paranormal or demonic encounter that you've ever heard of from one of the guests or interviewers or interviewees? Obviously, this is not proof, but any that sounded credible or convincing. I don't recall that I've actually interviewed that many people that would even claim to have had particularly demonic experiences. At least none immediately come to mind. I'd have to probably sit back and think about it, but Michael Witkoff, used to be into, Satanism and high level Freemasonry and that kind of stuff. So the interviews that we did with Michael Witkoff discuss his experiences in that kind of stuff and how he believes it was demonic. Father Deacon, do you have any stories of people that you think were possessed or this kind of stuff?
That I've encountered?
Yep.
Let's see. I've encountered a gypsy that came to our church once. I was busy and I was kind of oblivious to it.
Is this when you had gypsies, tramps, and thieves coming to your church?
Yeah.
That was a joke. That's the Cher song. I was making a joke.
Oh, well, I was going to actually make a joke, too.
Gypsies, tramps, and thieves.
What was all the boomers used to be into that band, the Gypsy Kings? Yeah, when the Gypsy Kings came to my parish, and I realized that they were all possessed.
When Cher came to Cher came to your parish,
yeah. Gypsy music. I'm trying to think other. There might be a couple other episodes. It's hard to tell too. I'm not particularly spiritually advanced to have that kind of discernment. So that's why I turned to I trusted my priest. It was like, yeah, that guy was actually possessed.
When I was at Evangelical, I remember doing some street ministry type stuff where we'd hand out sandwiches and things like that with Salvation Army and that kind of stuff. And I think some of those street people were legitimately, possessed.
Yeah. One way to tell too that there was around holy objects. There's different levels of possession. But talking about God or if somebody just gets strangely and inappropriately really violent and angry, that could be a potential sign. I've seen that. Beyond that, off the top of my head, I don't think.
Didn't we have somebody on Discord one time that was like an atheist, occultist type guy who was in and started growling and yelling and
that was weird.
Yeah, I don't know if you.
We did have a couple last year. Somebody broke when I was in California. Somebody broke into our parish, and one of the kids that had grown up in the church was like an altar boy. He obviously was suffering from mental health issues, and he was sent off to the ward, the mental hospital, to get help. But he had a friend with him that obviously was taking advantage of him, that might have actually been possessed, or he was obviously into the occult. But it was right after I left liturgy, and then I came back to set up for Vespers. Everybody was freaking out. The priest's wife, the Priodessa, and that basically he had climbed in, broke into the altar, and he tore apart the altar, and he was screaming "Hail Satan!" and
wow,
he was arrested. So possibly that. Or maybe he wasn't possessed and he was just an occultist, and like that's what he thought he had to do. I mean, either way, he was kind of in the grips of the devil.
Yeah, those are good examples.
I have another question.
Okay, well, hold on. So before you do that, we're going to go ahead and we've been going for almost 2.5 hours. So we'll go ahead and call this a night. We can continue the discussion in the Discord. If you're on the YouTube channel, you're welcome to join the Discord, and we can continue it there. But thank you, everybody. It's been a good chat. Be sure and follow Father Deacon Ananias. Follow all of our buddies. I'll add their stuff to the show description, and then I'll title this talk appropriately. But thank you, everybody, for your super chats.